it's my pleasure to introduce Jonathon Figdor, who is a guy who I have a tremendous amount of respect for. After he graduated from Vassar, he decided to take his very fancy, expensive education and go to rural Montana, where he worked at a domestic abuse shelter. And I think that shows an incredible amount of humility and dedication to making the world a better place. I do think that there is something that only a Vassar grad would have, which is when they go to Montana being surprised that the people of rural Montana did not draw their ethical guidance from Kant and from Mill and from Aristotle, which he was, though. And he realized that instead that people like Rick Warren and Jerry Falwell, well, maybe not Falwell anymore, but certainly Pat Robertson, I would think, are the folks who, those people, and a lot of Americans all over, not to... I'm sure, actually I know there are atheists in Montana too, so, but anyway. Folks all over the country do not take their moral guidance from philosophy, but instead from religion. And John decided that he needed to kind of learn how to speak that language and live in that world. So he decided to go and get what I think is the first Master of Divinity degree from Harvard University in atheism. And he is now the assistant chaplain at the Harvard Humanist Chaplaincy. And he's going to talk to you about his experience being entrepreneurial and inventing that role. And maybe a little bit about how people can invent their own roles. Eh?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Please welcome John.
So you're going to see there's a slideshow I have going up behind us. These are just random photos from the last year of activities and things. So you can just see that flashing up there. It should be interesting for the talk. So Princeton University has a reputation as the country club of the Ivy League, in part because of their longtime association with Southern Protestant elites, and in part because of their longtime exclusion of ethnic minorities and women. Indeed, Princetonians decided in 1958 to consciously and conspicuously ban Jews from eating at the university's dining clubs. In the 1960s, however, a funny thing happened at Princeton. The university reconsidered its admissions policy and began to admit women and ethnic minorities. And a funny thing happened. Let's turn the clock forward 50 years to see what happened. Guess what? Just 50 years later, Samuel Alito, ethnic minority, Princeton class of 1972, Sonia Sotomayor, a woman and an ethnic minority, Princeton class of 1976, and Elena Kagan, a woman and an ethnic minority, Princeton class of 1981, found themselves on the United States Supreme Court. This is a story about how a change in the values and priorities of an influential institution can produce very real results. Why am I lecturing you on Princeton's admissions policy from 60 years ago? Because I think that the secular movement, if it wants to survive and prosper, must learn from the so-called Princeton experiment. Let's take a quick look at the state of the current secular movement so I can show you what I mean. The secular movement does some things very well. For example, we use advertising extremely effectively to spread the word that we're good without God. We also do a great job fighting legal battles to protect our rights and the rights of other non-religious Americans. And finally, atheists such as Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and our very own P.Z. Myers do a capable and wonderful job of publicly articulating the humanist message. However, there are some areas where we need to improve. If our programs and activities are to be attractive to a broader audience, we need to invest in two things: students and professional leadership. Investing in students is absolutely essential because today's students are tomorrow's leaders. If we humanists and secularists wish to see our values promulgated among the highest echelons of society, among future Supreme Court justices, among future academic, medical, and business leaders of the world, we too must invest in students. There's a reason why the current Supreme Court is constituted exclusively of Jews and Catholics currently. That's because Jews and Catholics have invested heavily in university Hillel houses and Catholic chaplaincies, and those investments are paying off. Currently, 6 of the 9 Supreme Court justices studied at Harvard Law School, including Chief Justice John Roberts and Associate Justices Kagan, Ginsburg, Scalia, Kennedy, and Breyer. The rest are from Yale Law. That's true. Religious folks have long been aware of the disproportionate influence that religious institutions at universities such as Harvard and other prestigious institutions command. And they're aware of this, and it is for this reason that they establish chaplaincies on college campuses in the first place. We know that many people make up their minds on important issues of faith and religion during their college years. If we want to ensure that the humanist perspective is well represented on college campuses, so that in time it will be well represented among the future leaders of this country, shouldn't we endeavor to provide them with professional humanist chaplains to discuss matters of ultimate concern or counsel them in their times of need? This is why we need to invest in humanist chaplaincies. How do humanist chaplaincies support students? Humanist chaplains perform a number of vital roles. First, humanist chaplains have extensively studied humanism and atheism and are familiar with humanist, atheist, secularist values and how to promote them effectively. In addition to our study of humanism, humanist MDivs receive counseling training so that they can apply the humanist philosophy to a range of practical problems. Let me give you an example of this. I'm reminded of an incident Greg described in his book. He tells a story about a young man who asked Richard Dawkins, "I'm thinking about committing suicide. Why shouldn't I?" Now, Richard Dawkins was flummoxed by this question, and he suggested that the student put the question up for discussion on the RDFRS website forums, or if that didn't work out, he recommended the student could go and visit one of the Anglican chaplains, who, in Dawkins' own words, are admittedly very nice people. Greg replies in his book, and I agree wholeheartedly, "Is this the best we can do? Rage against the dying of the Enlightenment, and then shoo our troubled youth right back to religion because we're too distracted or too cerebral or maybe both to spend a few moments of our deep thoughts on how to be more loving and more helpful?" Greg is right. If we're unwilling to invest the time and money in institutions like humanist chaplaincies that provide atheists comfort and support in their time of need, then guess what? A generation of young atheists will walk right out our doors and back into the pews and prayer mats. After all, why would anyone feel allegiance to an institution that cannot be bothered to care about them in their time of need? One thing is for sure, and that's that the Catholic Church will always have a chaplain on campus, and so will Hillel, and so will many other Christian denominations. If we do not provide a humanist alternative, then students will be drawn to these religious communities. As Lucy from Oregon's AHA group said, people are not attracted to churches because of their theologies, but instead because of the communities they offer. If churches continue to provide welcoming communities, students will be attracted to a religion not for the toxic theology, but for the community. Finally, I want to mention one other brief section of Greg's book that spoke to me personally. In his book, Greg discusses his father's illness and death, writing, "You could tell he, Greg's father, longed for community because when the Jehovah's Witnesses would knock on his door to try to convert him, he would always drag himself out of his sickbed, all of his gloom lifting at the opportunity for companionship and serious discussion." Still, the young men did not come often, and in any case, given their wildly different worldview from his, they were not ideal companions. So my father died feeling quite alone. My question is this. If we agree that a humanist chaplain is essential in a college atmosphere because that's a major life transition for students when they're making serious decisions, then is a chaplain not also essential at other major life transitions, marriage, the birth of one's child, a serious illness or death of a loved one? There are some moments in our life that are so great, so consequential, that we need to discuss them with an honest, trustworthy, but most important of all, non-judgmental confidant. Do we want that person to necessarily be a priest, rabbi, or minister exclusively? Cannot we people of reason, cannot we humanists provide the same service for our community? I say we can and we will. Just before I finished my second year of my MDiv, my aunt died. Now, she was religious. I know that she died with her pastor by her side and her friends from church attending her. I want to know that when I too am old and my time has come, I will not have to rely on a kindly Episcopalian or Unitarian to sit with me in my final moments. I want to know that I will not be proselytized to upon my deathbed for lack of an alternative like Greg's poor father. In addition to the urgent and necessary work of providing humanists, student and adult alike, with the kind of support that students and adults of every other faith tradition have enjoyed for years, humanist chaplains create a burgeoning intellectual community and provide students and the greater university community as well with a wealth of programs and activities. This year at Harvard, for example, Greg and I have rolled out an audacious schedule with more than 140 events spanning every age group. In addition to these regular meetings of our 6 different campus groups, we organize lectures from speakers such as Steven Pinker, Mark Hauser, Rebecca Goldstein, Stephen Prothero. In addition to, and we help the undergrads plan the Keystone event of the year, which is the Humanist of the Year Award, which has been received by Salman Rushdie, Greg Graffin, Joss Whedon, and last year the Mythbusters Adam Savage and Jamie Heineman. Consistently producing this many high-quality, professionally managed events takes so much time that it is simply impossible for volunteers to accomplish it alone without professional direction. Finally, and most importantly from the perspective of the SSA, humanist chaplains act like tent poles for local humanist groups. We know from experience that interest in student groups rarely comes in a steady flow. Some years, there are lots of interested leaders, and a group seems well organized. But then, those leaders graduate, and all of a sudden, there's a leadership vacuum. This can be absolutely disastrous, as we have seen in our affiliation renewal surveys. If a group does not have a humanist chaplain to help see them out of difficult times, it's hard to see how they'll survive. For example, Greg recruited me to help rebuild the humanist graduate community during a time when the Harvard undergrads were running strong. I helped Greg basically rebuild the grad group from a group of 5 to 10 people to a group of 45 to 50 people who met bi-weekly. Now that I've been hired as the assistant humanist chaplain at Harvard, it's now my job to turn back and help the undergrads redevelop their community as their leadership transition goes on. In short, a humanist chaplain can lend stability to a local community, keeping groups alive during difficult times and helping groups manage their growth during the explosive growth periods. So you get it now, why Greg and I think this humanist chaplaincy thing is a good idea. So let's talk a little about how to become a humanist chaplain. We at the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard are very proud to officially announce that we now offer a humanist chaplaincy training program at Harvard Divinity School, and we'll be accepting applicants for the 2011-2012 academic year. If you're interested in this, please don't hesitate to email me at jfigdor@harvardhumanist.org. I'll put it up on the board at the end of this. And I can send you some information on applying, on the costs, and even some admissions tips to try to help you get you in. In order to enter the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard program, you have to be accepted at Harvard Divinity School. After a student's accepted at the school, he or she would meet with me and Greg, and we would help you plan out your schedule and set your entire course of study. In essence, humanist MDivs graduate from the standard MDiv program at Harvard, but with a focus on humanism. We take all the required classes at the institution, including the extensive 3-course language requirement in whatever high church language you choose to take. Mine was German and French. And unfortunately, toxic theology classes like history, theology, and practices of Western Christianity. Now, let me pause and talk about these classes. It's very annoying to have to take these. But at the end of the day, it's actually a great opportunity for humanists to spread their message. I got to talk to a room of 200 Harvard MDivs about their faith and ask them these really hard-hitting questions, the questions that you all have been asking, during these conferences. And they actually think about this. They respond to me. They're interested in having this dialogue. So even though we're being forced to take their Christian indoctrination classes, it's fine. We end up actually making them suit our purposes. In addition to your coursework at Harvard Divinity School, the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard will be partnering with the Humanist Institute to offer students scholarships so that humanist MDivs will also earn certificates in humanist leadership from the Institute. As a result, when you leave the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard training program, you will be an elite candidate for positions in the humanist world. We hope to produce an elite cadre of Harvard-educated, extensively trained humanist and atheist leaders who can use their unique skill sets to advance humanism and atheism in a variety of careers. I see, that did it. The magic word careers. And now you're paying attention again. Let's talk about what kind of jobs are available for graduates of a program like ours. I've spoken at length about university chaplaincies, but I'm sure you're curious about job prospects at these. I'll begin with a little bit of brutal honesty by saying that currently there are no jobs available, and there are no universities that are hiring chaplains. But that doesn't mean that they won't. Universities such as Stanford, Yale, Tufts, and Wellesley have expressed interest in hiring one in the very near future. Becoming a humanist chaplain takes a lot of work, from convincing Harvard Divinity School to accepting you, to finding a job on the way out. Nothing is easy. However, if you're the sort of person who's a self-starter, who appreciates a challenge, and isn't bothered by long hours or low pay, then this is the job for you. However, perhaps you're not quite so adventurous, or maybe you have student loans to pay off. For whatever reason, stability and security are important to you. Are you precluded from the work of humanist chaplains? Of course not. In addition to serving in universities, humanist chaplains can pursue careers in military and hospital chaplaincies. Unlike university chaplaincies, there are plenty of job opportunities for hospital chaplains. One of my former professors at Harvard is the head of chaplaincy at the Dana-Farber Cancer Center, and he was immediately interested in the prospect of hiring humanist chaplains. In some sense, we are actually the ideal candidates for hospital chaplaincies. Since we humanists don't have a made-up theology, we don't bring theological baggage into our engagements with patients. A Christian chaplain, for example, might have some considerable difficulties tending to an atheist or Buddhist patient who both deny the existence of God. As a result, humanist chaplains are capable of ministering, please mind the term, to a much wider spectrum of patients. As a result, humanist chaplains would be readily welcomed into hospital chaplaincies. Furthermore, if one trains at Harvard, you would have the opportunity to meet with people like Walter Mushinsky from the Dana-Farber Cancer Center and other prestigious institutions that would be interested in hiring you. Now, I'm less familiar with military chaplaincies, and in part this is because I'm not terribly interested in military life. I chose to go into academia so I could wake up after 11 a.m., and throwing all that away to go on 5-mile runs at 6 in the morning doesn't sound terribly appealing to me. But maybe you're a masochist, and that's fine. So I say go for it. Currently, the military has no humanist chaplains, nor any plans to hire any. However, throughout my time at Harvard, I corresponded with a number of active and retired military personnel, including some high-ranking flagstaff officers, and they were extremely encouraging about developing humanist chaplaincies. I'd love to put prospective humanist chaplains into contact with some of these individuals so that someone can pioneer the military humanist chaplaincy track. And trust me, whoever becomes the first humanist chaplain in the US military is going to be an extremely visible and influential figure in the non-theistic world, and will go a long way towards nailing the coffin shut on that old myth that there are no atheists in foxholes. Finally, I want to return to the question of public advocacy for our viewpoint. As much as I appreciate the great work that individuals like Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Richard Dawkins do in defending atheism and advocating for a reason-based lifestyle, they're individuals, and they need help. The world's religions are arrayed against us, replete with institutes devoted to churning out bunk science and think tanks devoted towards pushing back against secularism. Why, just this month, on the heels of me being hired at Harvard, the Vatican responded by opening an office to combat the spread of secularism. Or maybe it was just a coincidence, I don't know. But the point is that we are under attack. And if you want to hear more about this, I suggest that you talk to Ellery Schempp about the Catholic war on secular humanism. Now, we ought to be thankful that we've been this successful for this long in communicating our values, considering how little investment we have made in professional atheist leadership. But I fear our luck will not hold out forever. That's why I want to urge the secular movement and its funders to think seriously about where it's spending its money. We're reaching the point at which relying on volunteers is infeasible. If we want to run consistent, high-quality, well-managed events, we're going to have to invest in professional management for our communities. After all, while volunteers are great, and they will always be a major part of the secular movement, they have limited time. We all know from experience how hard it can be to integrate our volunteer efforts with our academic life or our work life. If the person running your group is at the end of the day, volunteers sometimes have to put their own needs over the needs of the group. Furthermore, it's difficult to have accountability within a volunteer-exclusive structure. If the person running your group is a paid professional, however, they can dedicate all their time to organizing meetings, events, etc. And then, even better, you have someone who's accountable for results at the end of the day. What's even better than that is that instead of being in charge of managing the nitty-gritty details of running a group, volunteers then have the opportunity to do what they're best at. Volunteer at soup kitchens, at food banks, or, we talked about science education, talking to kids about science. And that's just the community organizing side. The other major benefit is that every humanist leader is an advocate for the humanist perspective. My boss, Greg Epstein, for example, writes articles, does interviews, blogs on CNN.com and the Washington Post, and travels around the country speaking about humanism. He would be unable to do this without his position at the Humanist Chaplaincy at Harvard. For a fairly meager sum, the HCH exerts considerable influence both at Harvard University and beyond. Imagine the world we could create if we gave Greg some backup and had humanist chaplains at Stanford, Yale, Cornell, Columbia, MIT, Rice, Tufts, I could keep going, who could all collaborate on advocacy campaigns together. Imagine if they could further collaborate with an extensive network of humanist chaplains in the military and hospitals. Imagine the public voice we would command, and how difficult it would be to discredit us as know-nothings, as graduates of Harvard Divinity School, the most prestigious institution of higher learning about religion in the world. My friends, the future is bright for humanist chaplains. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, we have 2 minutes for Q&A, so ask me anything. Thanks.